Here's something that's absolutely frickin' crazy. There's a new land tax that's a hidden disaster. It's going to destroy many homeowners and farmers. So instead of taxing the homes itself and the buildings, the LVT is going to tax the land itself. So at first look, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. But taxing the land itself and not what's built on it, that sounds fine, right? But once you realize this crazy tax proposal comes with some massive risks. For homeowners, it can mean skyrocketing tax bills. And for farmers, it could actually force them to sell their entire land altogether. So in today's video, we're going to break down how this LVT works and why it's being proposed, and the hidden dangers that could actually impact millions. So if you think your property is safe, you should think again. Now, number one, we need to understand what this LVT stands for, what the land value tax actually is. Basically, it's a way of taxing property where only pay taxes on the value of the land itself. So with regular property taxes, you pay on everything. You pay taxes on the land, the house, the land that sits on everything, right? But with the land value tax, or the LVT, they ignore the house. Any changes you made to it, doesn't even matter how big it is. They only care about what the value of that land is worth itself. But the people who support this idea, they say it's more fair and it stops people from just holding on to empty land and waiting for it to go up in more value, which is true. But it also rewards people for their actual use of the land. For example, you could add a room to your house or fix up your kitchen, or the taxes, all that stuff doesn't matter under the LVT. It's all about that land. It's not about what you built on it. And they say that this idea could even encourage development and stop land from just sitting idle. But the problem is, this idea only works in dense urban areas with high land values, because this causes major problems to rural areas. So think about it. Farmers, for example, they need a lot of land to make a living. You just can't tax them the same way as living in a small city apartment. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. But reality, this whole idea of taxing the land looks great on paper, but actually putting it into practice, it's much more complicated and it could be a cluster. Number two, the LVT harms farmers and rural communities. You know, farmers and the people who are living in the countryside, this LVT idea could be a total disaster. Like I said, farmers need a lot of land to run their farms. And even though rural land usually has a lower value per acre, the sheer size of farms means that the total acres, the total tax burden could be enormous. And you could argue that other taxes would be lowered to make up for this, but there's no guarantee that that would actually happen. So according to the USDA data, the average value for an acre of farmland is around $3,000. Now, if a farmer has 1,000 acres, which is not unusual, especially in smaller farms, they could get crushed, because even smaller increases in taxes would mean tens of thousands of dollars in expenses. And most farmers, they're living on the edge. They just don't have that money laying around. Sure, they could switch to vertical farming, which uses less land, and they could farm more without requiring more land, but that doesn't happen very easily. And it doesn't work for crops like wheat, corn, or soybeans. Vertical farming is better for stuff like grapes and beans and stuff like that, right? Not large-scale farming that feeds the country. Now, on top of that, farmers are already competing in a tough global market. So higher taxes on their land, it's going to make it even harder, and it's going to crush more. So where are you going to get your food from? You see, farmers just can't pass the extra costs on to consumers, because cheap alternatives from abroad would flood the market. And taxing land could actually put the local farmers out of business. So the risks go beyond economics. So family farms that are passed down through generations could actually face a huge tax bill. Just because their land is valuable doesn't mean that they're not making a ton of money from it. So imagine a farmer with 1,000 acres and being taxed on how much that land is worth if it was developed, not on what it's actually used for and earning money farming. And if they can't pay those taxes, they're going to have to sell it. And then who's going to buy them? The big corporations and the developers, right? It's a mess. But it's not just farms, guys. Number three is homeowners and families. Taxing land isn't just going to impact the farmers. The land values increase from growing areas, as do the taxes. So corporations do have ways to profit from their land, like building businesses or renting it out. Regular homeowners just don't have as many options. So you can use your backyard for your family home and generate income, but the land taxes go up. So there's no way to make more money to pay them. If you're renting it out, it's only going to rent for this much money. So most families, their home is their biggest asset. So under this LVT, your house actually becomes a liability. Now imagine this. Homeowners who don't want to sell their homes could be forced to sell just because they won't be able to keep up with these tax bills. Now another thing is, a lot of building and growth is happening around your neighborhood. The value of your land could skyrocket, and so could your taxes. And it could get to a point where you can't afford taxes on your home that you've lived in for decades. Now this is especially tough for retirees and low-income families, because they're on fixed income and they rely on a stable, predictable cost, if the land tax goes up, this is unexpected, and this huge tax increase is something that they just can't afford. Number 4, the LVT is only theoretically a good deal. The truth is, a land value tax rarely works as people say that it will. Now, it's much more complicated than it sounds, and it's not really going to target the rich investors. Instead, it's going to mostly hurt the regular homeowners, the farmers, and small communities. But the biggest problem is that the LVT is that it really is designed for cities. Now, in a city, taxing land can encourage people to build on empty lots and use land that's not currently used very well. So in cities, taxing land would encourage owners to develop vacant lots and bring it to their highest value. So in other words, using it in the best light. But the same logic just doesn't apply to rural towns and suburbs. These areas, the land isn't inherently valuable. You know, what if it's a swamp? What if it's in a place that's you can't do anything with it? What if the hills are so angled that you can't use it? Development isn't profitable there. So farmers and families in these areas, the LVT just becomes a huge tax burden and something that encourages them to do anything different. So farmers can't just stop growing food, and they can't change how they grow food just because their taxes went up. And then there's this problem of actually implementing it, figuring out how much the land is worth and considering what the buildings are on it and the local economy and zoning rules, and it's really going to be a cluster. So essentially, it favors cities over rural areas, but in the end, instead of fixing tax problems, the land tax could create a new one and totally hurt people that it was supposed to help, the regular homeowners and the farmers. And number 5 is the alternatives and possible solutions. Now, what could be a good approach is the split rate tax system. Rather than scrapping the entire system for the pure LVT, it could tax the land at a higher rate and the buildings at a lower rate. And this would encourage people to actually use their land because just holding on to empty land becomes more expensive. The problem is this would mean that those with more valuable land, like owners of big mansions or commercial buildings, they're going to pay a higher percentage of the taxes, but at the same time, a regular family home or farmland would get taxed at a more reasonable rate. Makes sense, right? So in this way, it involves some problems without putting too much pressure on the middle-class families and farmers. But you could also create limits on how much the taxes would go up for these groups, or completely exempt people from certain taxes. And this is going to prevent people from forcing to sell their homes or their farms just because they can't keep up the taxes. Now, we all know the taxes have to be paid. We all know that we all pay taxes. Some areas of the nation, it's lower for land taxes. Some areas, it's higher. I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is the 5th lowest tax rate in the nation. But in some places, it's way higher than that. But just think about it. Older people who are retired or living on a fixed income, they shouldn't have to sell their house where they lived in their whole lives or what they've moved to for retirement. What do you think about all this stuff? Is this crazy? I mean, what is going on here? Did you find any of this information helpful? I hope you did. Don't forget to like, to share, and subscribe. There's always good real estate information here on this channel to help you to avoid those pitfalls that are costly. So if you didn't already know, my name is Jerry with Jerry Pincus Real Estate Experts. I have over 1,400 videos here on this channel. My real estate team is here to help you find your hidden gem and to avoid those pitfalls that are costly. If you're thinking about buying or selling property and you have questions, pick up the phone, give us a call. This is what we do every day and we're good at it. I know that we can help you. 843-839-9870. Until next time, stay happy, stay educated, and I'll talk to you soon.